Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to finally be back up here. My name is Nichelle, and I'm the youth pastor here at DCC. And actually, the last time that I was up here on Sunday on stage speaking was when all of you were deciding whether I would come on as staff. And so when you start out at that level of pressure, everything that comes after just seems way more manageable. And so I can honestly tell you that I am just really excited to get to be back up here this morning. And so like I said, I have been here for about 5 months now, 5th month. And so Dresden is slowly but surely starting to become my home. DCC is becoming my community. And so because of that, a number of you are starting to get to know me a little bit better, which means that you know things like, number one, I'm a plant killer. I know that Pastor Chris put me on blast over this a couple of weeks ago, but he's not wrong, because it doesn't matter what kind of plant you give me, killable or unkillable, it will be killed, because I just can't get my head around this whole watering thing. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it's gotten so bad, actually, that Chris has now started to refer to my apartment as the morgue. That's his joke, but I'm taking it. Second thing is that my office is usually pretty messy. I would love for you to come and meet with me and visit with me in there, but it will always be a standing meeting because currently all of my seating space is being overtaken by a very large air hockey table. If you find anything weird in the church, like Nerf bullets or glow-in-the-dark stars or live frogs, just kidding, we haven't played that game yet. But if you find any of these things tucked away in a corner of the church or under your pews, I'm usually responsible, unless the second Wednesday seniors lunch has gotten a little bit wild that week, and in that case, Reverend Linda is the one responsible. I thought this morning I would just continue to add to that list of things to know about me. And so I wanted to share with you that I hate being late. Nothing causes me more stress, more anxiety than being late for something. So much so that I will do things like when we had our young adults Christmas party back in December. Instead of making the 1-minute walk that it takes for me to get to Mel and Chris's house, I decided I needed to drive. And so I got in my car, drove to their house, looked at the clock, realized how ridiculously early I was, and so decided I needed to do, a couple of laps just to burn off some of that time. But what I didn't factor in is that I ended up right back at my own house because I live a block away. I have also been known to take naps in the back of my car when I arrive too early for appointments to possibly check in. And so I can confirm that RAV4s are surprisingly spacious. And what I also wanted to share with you this morning is this recent experience that I had in which I was forced to be late. And so, as some of you know, back in December, I got engaged. And actually, my fiancé is here today. He's in the second pew back. Yes? He is here for any fact-checking purposes. If after I tell this story you need to check anything out, he's right there available for you. But back in December, Nick had planned this amazing and elaborate proposal. But the success of that proposal hinged on one thing, or rather, one person, my mom, who's also here this morning. And the success of the proposal hinged on her ability to not only keep me busy for the entire day, but also to keep me from carrying out the schedule that I had made for myself, which, knowing me, was planned down to the minute. And so, you can imagine the chaos that ensued as I desperately tried to pursue my own schedule, while my sweet and loving mother tried to switch up the plans on me in order to execute this surprise. And part of switching up those plans meant that she was driving me around the outskirts of St. Thomas, just trying to buy Nick a little more setup time. But the issue with that is that I thought I was supposed to be at a dinner. And so adding to that list of things to know about me is that I don't like to be late, and I don't like to miss a meal. Yeah, you can relate. And so things were tense. And just to give you a little picture, a little insight into what that day looked like, here's some direct quotes that I actually said to my sweet and loving mother. First thing that I said was, "How would you like it if I knowingly made you late for something?" I said, "You can drive faster than 40, you know." And my personal favorite, "I need you to take a step back, look at yourself, and realize how unreasonable you're being." Yeah. And so I truly was not the best version of myself that day. But hey, I still have this ring on my finger. Nick is still here. My mom is still here. And actually, I brought this picture to show you guys what the engagement ended up looking like, which is really hilarious considering the dialogue that was taking place like 10 minutes before. We ended up getting a really, really beautiful shot. But if you're anything like me, then the frustration of being late is real. And that frustration can transfer to friends, to family, and it can also transfer to God. We say things like, God, you're late. You're not here. You didn't show up for me in the way that I wanted, in the time frame that I needed, in the spot that I wanted you to be there. And this can show up in a bunch of different ways inside of our lives. Like maybe you feel like God is late in giving you that promotion, giving you that job that you deserve. Maybe you feel like God is late in bringing you to that spot in life that your age tells you should be at. Or maybe God is late in taking that person who's sitting next to you out of the friend zone so that you can date them. Again, youth pastor. But however it shows up in your life, whatever it looks like for you, it usually comes out the same way. We say, why doesn't God do something about this? Has anyone ever felt like that? My hand is extra high. Why doesn't God do something about this? And it's so easy for us to come up with a this. Why hasn't God healed my family member who's sick? Why hasn't God brought my friend who walked away from their faith back? And honestly, in my life, there have been multiple occasions where I felt like I've been standing there, tapping my foot, waiting for God to show up, as it seemed like tragedy was entering into my life. And so I get it. I know what that feels like. So this morning, we're going to take a look at what the Bible says we can know in these moments when we're anxiously tapping our feet, waiting for God to show up. And so more specifically, we're going to take a look at a story where it would seem that Jesus shows up late on purpose, having some pretty negative consequences for some people that love him. But thankfully, as Jesus shows up late, he takes some time to explain maybe really what is going on in these moments where it feels like we are waiting, where it feels like he is late. And so this morning, we're going to be taking a look at the Gospel of John, chapter 11. If you have your Bibles, I would recommend opening it up because we're going to be going through the whole chapter, or you can follow along on screen. And so everything begins with Jesus in this relationship with some friends. And I think it's important to note that Jesus, while he was here on earth, really had genuine connections, genuine friendships, because of course he was fully God, but he's also fully man. And so as we begin to read, we hear about two of these friends named Mary and Martha. And just a couple of verses before, a third friend is mentioned, and his name is Lazarus. And Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha. And Lazarus is a dear friend of Jesus. But what happens is that Lazarus becomes sick. He becomes ill. And so what do you do when a family member becomes sick? I know many of us have probably walked down this road. You pray, because it's beyond your control, it's out of your hands, there's nothing else that you can do about it, and so you pray. And this is the situation that this family of Mary and Martha and Lazarus are in. Now, as this is happening, as this situation is unfolding, Jesus is about a day and a half's journey away. And so Mary and Martha, they write to Jesus and they say, Lord, the one you love is sick. And so this gives us some sort of a clue or indication as to the intimacy of this friendship, because they don't even have to say his name, and Jesus knows that they're talking about Lazarus. And so when Jesus heard this, he said, this sickness will not end in death. And so for us following along reading, we're thinking, okay, I was a little bit worried, but Jesus, you're saying this is all right, it's in your hands, okay. But if we continue on reading, I think that this is the point at which we could also say that Jesus starts to make some questionable friendship decisions. Because if we continue on reading, we see it says, no, it is for God's glory so that God's Son may be glorified through it. For God's glory. Lazarus is sick. He's almost on his deathbed. I thought life was for God's glory. And then the verse continues. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Jesus knew that his friend was sick, but chose to stay where he was. Now, if you or I were writing this, it would probably sound like Jesus loved Mary, he loved Martha, he loved Lazarus. And so when he heard that he was sick, he went to him immediately. And then he did what he had done for countless other strangers and healed him. But this is not what Jesus says. This is not how he responds to the situation. Instead, he chooses to stay put, which mystifies everyone. And so he stays put for 2 more days. And then finally, after those 2 days, he turns to his disciples and says, "Let us go back to Judea," which is where Mary and Martha and Lazarus are. And the disciples, they respond by saying, "But Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" And so just to give a little bit of context here, as this situation is unfolding, this is far enough into Jesus' ministry that he has started to attract some negative attention. There are people that are trying to harm Jesus. There are people who are plotting against his life. And so the disciples, what they're saying here is, "Jesus, are you sure you want to go back to Judea? Because there are some people there that are trying to hurt you. And actually, sometimes when they're throwing their stones at you, they miss and they hit. So, are you sure you want to head back there?" And Jesus responds by saying, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." And it's at this point that the disciples respond with some brilliant medical advice, because they say, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Verse 13, Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." I think we need to pause there and just reread those last 2 verses. Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe." So that you may believe, so that you may have faith, so that your trust towards God could grow. But now let us go. And for so many of us in this room, we've been in this situation. We have had a Lazarus inside of our lives, whether it be a person or a thing or an opportunity where we have just felt like, "God, I need you. I need your help." But then God has not responded in the way that we thought he would, or maybe even the time frame that we thought he would. But I think what Jesus is trying to do here is send a really clear message to the disciples. And he's saying, "I am allowing this to happen because I'm forming something in you." That's what he's saying. You or I, on the outset of this, we're saying man, this has got to be medical malpractice. Jesus, if you were a doctor, you would have your license taken away because you're for sure not upholding your oath to heal. You have to take care of these people. And on top of it all, this is for sure a friendship foul. And Jesus is saying that there is something even more important than the immediate lifting of disease. And that is that your relationship, your connection, your trust with God that needs to be built. And so the first thing that I want us to walk out of this morning knowing is that having to wait does not mean that God is late. Having to wait does not mean that God is late. Because he may take his time responding to your priority, what you want, what you need, what you are asking for. He may even show up late to the party that you are trying to throw. But that does not mean that he is late on his priority. That does not mean that he is late on what he is trying to do in you. Because so often we come to God and we say, "God, would you do this for me? Would you show up and do this for me?" And he might say yes, or he might say, "No, I'm not going to show up and do this for you, but I am going to do something in you, and I'm never late on that one." And so Jesus, his purpose here is to build trust, build confidence, build reliance. He's trying to build the connection between us and God. And even though we are so focused on the immediate, on our immediate needs, Jesus' eyes are set on the eternal, which is our faith and relationship in him. So you might ask, when am I going to get married? Well, I don't know, but I do know that God is not late and he's forming something in you in the waiting. When am I going to get the job? I don't know, but God is forming something in you. From this text, we can see that God is clearly trying to form something for those involved in this situation. And he prioritizes what he can do in us over what we might want him to do for us. The last time that I was up on this stage, I told the story about how God called me into youth ministry. And the way that I presented it probably sounded like you could wrap it up with a perfect bow. God called me to youth ministry, I responded, God gave me a job in youth ministry. That's not exactly how it went. Because truthfully, God did call me to youth ministry. I do believe that. I did respond in obedience by really dropping what I was doing at the time to enroll in seminary, to equip myself for what I felt God was calling me to. But then I graduated, and it felt like radio silence. And so I had to get a job. So I worked at the mall. I worked serving coffee. I was an admin assistant. I was a marketing assistant. I worked at a bridal store. I had 4 jobs at once at one point, and this went on for 2 years. And so the waiting got hard. And I began to ask God, like, you called me to this, now what? But then we can flash forward to this morning as I stand on the stage and I'm the youth pastor here. And again, this is part of the story that we usually would focus in on. But what about those 2 years? What about that time of waiting? Because looking back, I can tell you now that that time of waiting was formative for me. It gave me the time and the space to really grow and mature in my faith. It allowed me to explore and strengthen the gifts that God has given me. It allowed me the time to find a really incredible community and find some really solid mentors. And it forced me to deepen my dependence on God. Because I thought I was ready. I really did. But God knew that I wasn't. He knew that there was still more He needed to form in me. And so this is what God can do as He forms faith in you. It might be frustrating, might even be tragic, but He is working something good. It is there because that is His pattern. And so if we jump back to our text here, where we left off, we find Jesus finally deciding to return to Judea. And so He arrives, but He realizes that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days. And if you have ever lost anyone close to you, you know that in those first 4 days, it can feel like an eternity. Those first 4 days, there's so many feelings and emotions that are cycled through. And so Jesus arrives, and Martha goes out to meet Him. And she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." And so Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Martha doesn't get it. She thinks that Jesus is talking about some future event, not the here and the now. And so Jesus, He replies, He says, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" Jesus says, this is not some future event, like I am it. And do you hear Him building faith again here? Do you hear Him focusing in on that priority? Do you believe this? And Martha, she replies by saying, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." And so, if you've ever been in the wake of a tragedy, maybe you can relate to Martha here, because I think she's just saying some vague faith statement. You know, after a tragedy has happened, and you know what you're supposed to say, you know how you're supposed to feel, but your heart just isn't there yet. And I'm convinced this is how Martha is feeling. And so Jesus says, "Do you believe?" And she says, "Yes, I believe in heaven." He says, "No, but do you believe?" She says, "Yes, I believe that you are the Son of God." But this isn't what He is asking. Like Mary, so many of us here this morning, we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, but we have trouble trusting that He can do anything today, and He can. We go down to verse 32, it says, "When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw Him, she fell at His feet and said, 'Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.' When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled." And so these 2 verses are so important because it's here that we can see the heart of God in the midst of a tragedy. Because Jesus was moved. He was affected by their hurt. He was affected by their despair. And so He says, "Where have you laid him?" And they say, "Come see, Lord." And then we get the shortest verse in the entirety of the Bible, which says, Jesus wept. The same tears that everyone else was crying. So Jesus was emotionally moved because the people were emotionally moved. Jesus was emotionally moved because the people were emotionally moved. Jesus is moved by what is terrible in this world. He is hurt by what hurts us, and this is the heart of God. And so when something terrible happens in your life, it's not because He is emotionally detached, because He gets there and He weeps. It's true of me, it's true of you. If you have a weep-worthy situation, Jesus is in it. Jesus is in it. And so the second thing that I want us to take away from this morning is that even if it feels like God is delayed, that does not mean that he is detached. And so when a marriage falls apart, or a friendship ends, or you lose your job, or you lose someone close to you, you need to know that emotionally, God is very close to that situation. And so when we ask questions like, where is God in this? He's weeping because he walks with us. When we ask, where was God when I was hurt? He was hurt. Where was God when I was broken? He was broken, not in strength, but in heart, broken for all that you have been through. And this morning, I don't pretend to know your list of hurts. I know that for some of you, it's more than I can probably even comprehend. Even if some of those hurts are self-inflicted, that's my story. But you need to know that if it broke your heart, it also broke God's. Jesus wept. Here's what's important, because at this point we have a fork in the road. We have two paths that we can take, two options. Because for some people, they will walk through a really horrible situation, a tragic situation. They will ask, where was God in this? Could he not have stopped this? But then others will walk through that same situation, and they will feel the closeness of God in that heartbreak. They will know that he was there with them through it all, through the despair. He was right there with them. And so this is the fork in the road that we have, and this is the decision that will impact us for years. Because God is not saying that whatever happened to you isn't bad. But if you choose to stay mad and say, he could have stopped it, that despair and bitterness is going to follow us for years. And so, verse 38, Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he says. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there he has been there 4 days. And I think what Martha is trying to do here is just get a little dig in there. Because Martha, like us all, is human, and she's just underwent a huge tragedy. And so I think she's saying, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, because that's how long it took you to get here. And because it took you so long to get here, it's going to smell. Because you know what happens to dead bodies? They smell, especially after 4 days. And Jesus, he replies by saying, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here. Why? So that they may believe that you sent me. This is what Jesus is after. When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out. Can you imagine what this must have been like to be there and to witness this? I think the danger sometimes is we read these verses and we hear these stories and we kind of think of them as a fairy tale. But this actually happened. I mean, if we were to get in a time machine and head back 2,000 years, we could have watched this in real time. I mean, we could have filmed it in slow-mo on our iPhones and then put it up on our Instagram stories. It's real. This happened. The dead man came out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And so Lazarus was raised from the dead. And with this miracle, I mean, there's so much that we can take from this. But the one thing that I want to be really clear about this morning is that with this choice, Jesus says yes to something that he had previously said no to. Because day 1, it was no. Day 2, no. Day 3, no. Right now, no. But then it was yes. And so I think that God has given us this story to tell us the pattern that he has for all of us. And that pattern is not to fulfill every desire or preference we may have in this life, but it's to tell us about a world that is coming where every real and godly desire is going to be fulfilled in the kingdom of heaven. Because in heaven, it will be a place where no relationships end in conflict, where no sickness ends in death. There won't even be sickness. Heaven will be a place where nobody sees tragedy ever happen again, because it says that he will wipe away every tear from our eyes. In other words, every time that we had to wait and we got no from God in order to form faith in us, That faith will no longer be required because everything will be set right. This is going to be a place where you don't have to worry about things like cancer, where we don't have to worry about things like gun violence or terrorism or broken relationships, because in heaven, the gap between us and God is gone. And so you want to live in a secure environment? That's coming. You want to live in a committed environment? That's coming. You want to live in unhindered fellowship and experience real and true peace finally? That's coming. And so the last thing that I want us to take away from this morning is that a no now is not a no forever. A no now is not a no forever. But for us in the here and now, I don't think that God gave us this story with Jesus and Lazarus to tell us that nothing bad is ever going to happen again. Everything is going to have a happy ending. I mean, all of us here have lived enough life to realize that that's just not true. There's going to be struggle. There's going to be tragedy. There's going to be things that don't go the way that we wanted them to. There are going to be times between now and the finish line where we are going to want to call out to God and say, why is it still a no? Why am I still waiting? Why has this still not gone my way? But eventually, there will be a world where you won't want anything because you will have all of it in God. And Tim Keller says this in a way that I really find helpful. He says, God will either give us what we asked for, or he'll give us what we would have asked for if we knew everything that he knows. And this morning, I just want to leave out with a picture of this. And so I need a little bit of help up here on stage. I saw Caleb come in. Caleb, do you want to come up and help me out on stage for a second? Thank you. Caleb is part of our youth group, and he came to our post-exam jam on Thursday. How was it? It was good. 2 thumbs up. That's what we like to hear. He got to shoot a laser gun. Very exciting stuff. All right, Caleb, what I want you to do is I want you to stand just up here in front of everyone. And here is your telescope. We're very low budget here. And what I want you to do is put it up to your eye, and I just want you to focus in on the carpet, okay? Focus in on the carpet. And now tell us what you see.
Carpet.
Can you describe it for us?
Brown.
Anything else?
Little bumps.
All right. That's a lot of detail. So you're going to stay exactly where you are, still stay focused on the carpet, and I'm going to ask you some questions, okay? All right, Caleb, can you see the sound booth at the back of the room?
No.
Okay. Can you see Mitch in the 3rd row?
No.
Can you see Don Martin doing a jumping jack in his pew?
No.
Can you see Nick doing a push-up in the aisle?
No.
Are you sure?
No.
Just one. Can't see that. Okay. Now, again, what can you see?
Carpet.
Carpet. All right, thank you, Caleb. You can go take a seat. The thing we need to remember is that there's always so much more going on in the background than we could possibly know or comprehend. There's so much more that we can't see. And so when we feel like God is late in responding to the thing that we are focused on, the thing that we are fixated on, it is not because he is emotionally detached. And it is not that he is going to hold out on us forever. Because you can bet that he is trying to do the same thing for you that he was aiming to do with Mary, with Martha, with the disciples, for the people who witnessed this situation unfold live. And that is to form faith in us while we wait. Let's pray. Jesus, we just thank you that you are a God who draws close to us. Lord, we thank you that you are there with us in heartbreak, in times of despair, Lord, that you are right there with us. You get there and you weep, Lord. And so I just pray that as we go out from this morning that we would just reflect on maybe a situation where we feel like you're silent, where we feel like you are late, Lord. Help us just to remember that you are with us, Lord, that you are not detached, and that a no now is not a no forever. Amen.